You've seen the pattern. Every relationship ends the same way. She says she loves you, but what she actually loves is the idea of conquering you. And deep down, you've always known the truth. You're not impossible to love because you're broken. You're impossible to love because you refuse to need it. There's a conversation that happens in every Sigma male's life. Someone who cares about you says, you need to let people in. You need to be more vulnerable. You need to learn to need someone. And every time, you nod politely while thinking, they fundamentally don't understand who I am. Today, we're exploring the uncomfortable truth about why Sigma males are structurally impossible to love in the way most people define love, and why you're completely aware of this reality even if you've never said it out loud. This isn't about fixing yourself. This is about understanding why you can't be fixed, and why that's not actually a problem. Reason 1, you've eliminated emotional dependency. Here's the first reason you're impossible to love. You've done the psychological work that most people avoid their entire lives. Ever noticed how most relationships are built on mutual neediness, disguised as love? People need their partner for emotional regulation, self-esteem maintenance, life direction, or just to avoid feeling alone. But you've systematically eliminated these dependencies. Here's what makes you impossible. Traditional love requires emotional gaps that another person can fill. But you've spent years filling your own gaps. You've learned to regulate your own emotions, validate your own worth, direct your own life, and be comfortable in solitude. When someone realizes they're not necessary to your emotional survival, many interpret this as not being loved. They confuse your lack of dependency with lack of affection. Most people don't realize this, but your emotional independence doesn't mean you can't love. It means you love from abundance rather than scarcity. But abundance-based love feels less intense to people addicted to need-based love. The deeper reality? You know you're impossible to love because you've watched people fall in love with the idea of fixing you, only to realize there's nothing broken to fix. And once they realize you don't need fixing, they don't know what role to play. Reason 2. Your love language is incomprehensible to most. Here's the second reason. The way you express and experience love doesn't match what society taught people to recognize as love. Ever been accused of being cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable by people you genuinely cared about? That's because your respect-based love looks nothing like their emotion-based love. Here's what makes you impossible. Most people express love through constant communication, emotional sharing, quality time, and verbal affirmation. But you express love through respecting boundaries, enabling independence, providing stability, and taking meaningful action. You show you care by not being needy or demanding, but they interpret this as not caring. You demonstrate love through competence and reliability, but they want emotional displays. You express affection by protecting their independence, but they want merging and closeness. You prove commitment through consistent action, but they need constant reassurance. Your love language is essentially invisible to people trained to recognize conventional expressions of love. You're speaking a different language entirely, and most people can't even hear it. You've been loving people in ways they couldn't recognize, and they've been calling you incapable of love while you were actively loving them in your own way. Most people don't see this coming, but your version of love is actually more mature and sustainable than emotion-based love. But maturity looks boring compared to emotional intensity. The deeper reality, you know you're impossible to love because you've realized that what most people call love is actually emotional dependency, control, and possession. And you can't participate in that system without betraying yourself. Reason 3. You won't surrender your autonomy. Here's the third reason. You refuse to merge identities or compromise your independence for relationship maintenance. Ever had someone tell you that relationships require sacrifice, compromise, and putting the other person first? And you thought, that sounds like losing yourself, not finding love. Traditional relationships expect both partners to blur their boundaries, merge their lives, and prioritize the relationship above individual goals. You keep your own space, time, and resources, even in serious relationships. You don't check in constantly or report your whereabouts. You make major life decisions based on your path first, relationship second. You don't abandon your mission, goals, or values for relationship harmony. You refuse to be someone's everything because that's too much responsibility. Most people's relationship fantasy involves two people becoming one unit. But you're fundamentally committed to remaining two complete individuals who choose to walk parallel paths. The brutal truth: partners interpret your boundary maintenance as emotional withholding. They see your independence as fear of commitment. They experience your self-preservation as rejection. Most people don't realize this, but your refusal to merge isn't fear of intimacy. It's protection of authenticity. You know that you can't be yourself if you have to become half of someone else. The deeper reality: you know you're impossible to love because you've watched relationships die the moment you refuse to sacrifice who you are. And you've realized you'd rather be alone and authentic than coupled and diminished. Reason 4: your timeline doesn't match relationship expectations. Here's the fourth reason: you operate on developmental timelines that don't align with conventional relationship milestones. Ever felt pressure to define the relationship, commit to next steps, or accelerate emotional intimacy faster than felt natural? That pressure comes from people operating on external timelines while you operate on internal readiness. Society has relationship scripts with expected timelines: exclusive after X dates, saying I love you after X months, moving in after X time, engagement by X years. But you move based on authentic readiness, not arbitrary schedules. You take significantly longer to open up emotionally than people expect. You need extended time to assess compatibility before committing. You won't say I love you until you genuinely feel it, regardless of timeline. You resist relationship escalation that feels premature to your development. You might suddenly be ready for something years after someone expected it. Most people experience your slow development as lack of interest or commitment phobia. They can't distinguish between not ready yet and not interested. You've lost relationships to impatience, not because feelings weren't real, but because your pace of emotional development was too slow for their timeline expectations. Most people don't see this coming, but your deliberate pacing actually creates stronger foundations when you do commit. But most people don't have the patience to wait for your authentic readiness. The deeper reality: you know you're impossible to love because you've realized that relationship timelines are socially constructed, and you simply can't force your authentic development to match arbitrary schedules. Reason 5: you see through the performance of love. Here's the fifth reason: you can't unsee the difference between genuine connection and performed romance. Ever been in a relationship that looked perfect on paper but felt hollow in reality? That's because you recognize when someone is performing the script of love rather than experiencing authentic connection. Once you see that most love is actually social performance, fear of loneliness, biological programming, or economic convenience, you can't participate in the illusion anymore. You see when someone loves the idea of you rather than who you actually are. You recognize when I love you means I need you, or I'm afraid to be alone. You notice when romantic gestures are obligatory performances rather than genuine expressions. You see through relationship milestones that are about social proof rather than authentic connection. You recognize when someone wants a relationship more than they want you. Your clarity about these dynamics makes you unable to participate in conventional romantic theater. You can't pretend that performed love is real love. The brutal truth: you've hurt people by being unable to reciprocate performed affection with performed affection. Your authentic responses feel like rejection compared to their scripted declarations. Most people don't realize this, but your inability to participate in love performance isn't cynicism. It's commitment to authenticity. You'd rather have nothing real than something fake. You know you're impossible to love because you've realized that what you need, genuine, unscripted, authentic connection, is so rare that betting on finding it feels statistically absurd. Reason 6. You're psychologically complete. Here's the 6th reason. You've achieved something most people never do. You've become whole without needing another person. Ever noticed how most relationship advice assumes you're incomplete and need someone to complete you? But you've already done the work to complete yourself. Here's what makes you impossible. Conventional romance is built on the premise that two half people become one whole person, but you're already whole, which means relationships can only add enhancement, not completion. You don't have emotional voids for someone to fill. You don't need someone to give your life meaning or purpose. You don't require external validation to maintain self-worth. You don't need saving, fixing, or completion. You're already the person most people are trying to become through relationships. Most people's relationship fantasies involve being needed. But you don't need them in ways that make them feel valuable. Your completeness feels like exclusion to people who want to be necessary. You've watched partners struggle to find their role in your life when you don't have obvious gaps for them to fill. Without neediness to exploit, they don't know how to prove their value. Most people don't see this coming, but your completeness should make relationships better, not impossible. But it only works with someone who's also complete. And complete people are rare. You know you're impossible to love because you've realized that most relationship dynamics are built on mutual incompleteness, and you've eliminated your half of that equation. Reason 7. You prioritize truth over comfort. Here's the 7th and final reason. You value uncomfortable truth more than comforting illusions, even in romantic contexts. Ever been accused of being too honest, too blunt, or not romantic enough? That's because you refuse to sugarcoat reality even when honesty threatens romantic fantasy. Here's what makes you impossible. Relationships often require strategic dishonesty, white lies, ego protection, comfortable fictions, unspoken truths, but you're constitutionally incapable of maintaining these illusions. You point out incompatibilities that others would ignore for the sake of the relationship. You refuse to pretend things are fine when they're not. You won't fake emotions you don't feel, even when honesty hurts. You address problems directly instead of letting them fester romantically. You tell truths about yourself, them, or the relationship that most people would hide. Most successful long-term relationships require some level of strategic blindness, ignoring certain truths for the sake of harmony. But you can't unsee what you see. You've destroyed relationships by being too honest, not cruelly, but authentically. Your refusal to maintain comfortable illusions makes you dangerous to romantic fantasy. Most people don't realize this, but your commitment to truth isn't lacking tact. It's respecting the other person enough to be genuine rather than patronizing them with lies. You know, you're impossible to love because you've realized that successful relationships often require collaborative delusion, and you're incapable of sustaining delusion even for love. Ever notice what connects all these reasons? You've optimized for authenticity, while everyone else optimizes for connection. Your eliminated dependency, incomprehensible love language, autonomous boundaries, internal timeline, performance immunity, psychological completeness, and truth prioritization all serve one purpose: maintaining authentic self regardless of social consequences. Here's what you've always known. You're not impossible to love because you're broken, damaged, or defective. You're impossible to love because you're complete, authentic, and uncompromising. And those qualities are incompatible with how most people understand and practice love. Most people don't see this coming, but your impossibility isn't a failure. It's a feature. You've chosen authenticity over acceptance, and that choice has consequences. Here's the truth you've been living. Every time you choose to remain authentically yourself instead of becoming conventionally lovable, you're making a choice. You could eliminate your impossibility by creating artificial dependency, performing conventional love languages, surrendering autonomy, accelerating your timeline, participating in romantic theater, accepting incompleteness, prioritizing comfort over truth. But you won't. Because you know something most people don't. Being loved as you are matters more than being loved by anyone. And being loved as you are requires finding someone who can love the impossible. Here's what separates you from people who are impossible to love due to damage or dysfunction. You know you're impossible to love, and you're okay with it. You're not in denial. You're not fighting against it. You're not trying to fix what isn't broken. You've accepted that conventional love isn't available to you, not because you're unworthy, but because you're incompatible with conventional love's requirements. And that acceptance is actually peaceful. You'd rather be authentically alone than inauthentically partnered. You'd rather be genuinely yourself than successfully loved as someone you're not. If you've always known you're impossible to love but never understood why, now you know. It's not a deficiency, it's a design feature. You're not broken. You're just built differently. The question isn't whether you can become possible to love. It's whether you'll keep choosing authenticity even knowing it makes you impossible. Some of you will keep choosing yourself over connection, and that's valid. Some of you will eventually find the rare person who can love the impossible, and that's beautiful. But either way, own what you are. Don't apologize for being impossible. Don't try to become possible by betraying your nature. Be impossible. Be authentic. Be yourself. If this video articulated something you've always felt but never could explain, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below with the word impossible and tell me which reason hit closest to home. And if this video gave you permission to accept your impossibility instead of fighting against it, hit that like button and subscribe for more uncomfortable truths about the Sigma male experience. Remember, you're not impossible because you're less than. You're impossible because you're unwilling to be less than authentic. Until next time, own your impossibility.